Hi guys, it's me, I'm back. I've been gone for the past few weeks because first of all, I was finishing off my second book, Read with Pride, which I have now finished. It is done, which is great news. And I was also gone because during that time, the entire world changed around me and around everyone. I'm talking in a very different time and things feel very scary right now, and it's taken me a few weeks to adjust to the new normality. Even though I don't have a huge social life and I don't go out loads and I don't spend lots and lots of time interacting with people, life is undoubtedly different right now, and that's taken some adjusting and it's taken a lot of brain power to do. But I'm going to try to post videos for you as much as I can because it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I hope it will offer you some comfort in these very difficult times. I really do believe that books are one of the main ways that we can get through this. They offer so much comfort and support, and so today's video is going to be on my favourite comfort reads. But before I get into talking about the books, I would just like to say that I hope you're all doing really well. I hope you're all remaining safe and you're being sensible too. I am sending all of my love to all of you wherever you may be in the world. None of us know what the future holds, but I remain hopeful that we will get through this and that things will improve at some point in the future. So I'm not going to address it in every video because I think it's on everybody's minds at the moment. You don't always need a reminder. But for this video, my first back, I just wanted to send my well wishes to all of you. Today's video is going to be about my comfort reads, my go-to books that I go to every time I need some comfort, and I've been relying on these a lot recently. So I'm going to talk you through my recommendations. You might have already read some of these, but hopefully there'll be some that you haven't, and I'd also love to know in the comments your favourite comfort reads and what you lean on in times of need. So I'm going to start off by talking to you about the book that I have read most recently, and I am now completely obsessed. This might be an unusual choice for a comfort read, but hear me out. This is The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard, and this is set just before the outbreak of the Second World War. It's set in England and opens in London, and it follows one family called the Casalets. There are three brothers, Edward, Hugh and Rupert, and the other characters are their wives, their parents and their children. So the book really is a family saga. I feel like it might be quite an unusual choice because when you are experiencing turmoil in your own life, why would you then read about the onset of turmoil in other people's lives? It doesn't make much sense on the surface, but I started reading this and I couldn't put it down. It reminded me of a different time. This time before the war when everything seemed kind of hopeful but also seemed like things could change at any second. There was a lot of political goings on that were happening that people were kind of unsure what they would lead to, and so you see that playing out, but you also see childhood innocence. You see everyday life continuing on even though that might be slightly different to what it once had been. And I found it immensely comforting to see my own anxieties and worries reflected in the characters' anxieties and worries. They are worrying about war and the uncertainty of it, just as I was worrying a few weeks ago about the uncertainty of the entire world being thrown into a pandemic and nobody quite knowing what that would mean. And it doesn't always mean positive things for everyone, but there was something nice about being able to dive into this book and just being able to live with the characters and their everyday lives for a space of time. I think the thing that I loved about this is that there isn't a huge ongoing plot. You really are living through the characters' eyes and seeing the world as they see it. In some senses, it's not an incredibly modern book, but in other ways, Elizabeth Jane Howard is an incredibly astute author who gets these tiny emotions and kind of blows them up so that you can see them on a bigger scale, which I really liked about it. I loved seeing the lives of the servants, of the family, of people who were living around the Casalets. And I'm going to be talking about this entire series more because I have recently bought myself the rest of the series, which I'm hoping to read in the next few weeks and months because I am now completely obsessed. I think this is probably my favourite book that I have read so far this year. My main go-to author in times like these is Eva Ibbotson, and I am meaning to do a video on all of her books at some point, so that is coming in the future. But I'd like to recommend to you today my two favourites. So the first one is The Morning Gift and the second one is A Company of Swans. I love all of her other books, but for me these are the standout ones. And actually The Morning Gift is quite a funny choice as well because it is also set before the outbreak of the Second World War. So something at the moment is drawing me to books set during that time. I can't quite explain it, but there is something that just feels quite, I don't even know. I don't know the emotion I feel when I read it, but for me, I love this book anyway. Even if I wasn't reading that kind of book at the moment, I still think this is one of my favourite books of all time. And it is about a young Jewish girl called Ruth who marries an English man in order to escape Austria because of the Anschluss, which was the annexation of Austria in the 1930s. So she marries Quinn, an English man, and she comes back to England where they say that they're then going to divorce and go their separate ways. But of course things don't quite turn out like that and affections grow between them. It is one of my favourite books of all time and my favourite Eva Ibbotson book. I reread it a lot and Ruth is probably my favourite Eva Ibbotson character too. And then the other one that I would recommend is A Company of Swans. This one is about a girl called Harriet who lives in a very strict household and then runs away to join the ballet in South America. It has this wonderful description of the rainforest and life in South America at this time for people like Harriet who were going out there. And Eva Ibbotson is an incredibly vivid author. She really does paint a picture of her settings and also her characters. And one of the things that I like about her books is that she has many cultural references. So in this it deals with the ballet, but she also talks a lot about music. Particularly she likes Mozart, and she also talks about books. And my favourite line in the book is one that I've actually saved, and it says, "Loneliness had taught Harriet that there was always someone who understood. It was just that so very often they were dead and in a book." So these are the two that I would recommend starting with if you've never read any Eva Ibbotson, but to be honest you could start anywhere. These two are just my favourites. Another author that I have been leaning on recently is Georgette Howard. I have been obsessed with her books and I can pick one up and finish it in one sitting. I lose sleep over her books because if I start one late at night I then can't put it down and stay up until the early hours to read it. And I am having to restrain myself because I don't want to read them all. I want to save them, but also I want more and more of them, and there are only a limited number, so I'm gonna have to save myself because I don't want to read them all in one go. But I also do. So the most recent book that I have read of hers is Frederica. I really loved this one. This is set during the Regency period, kind of late Regency period, and it is about Frederica, but is mostly told from the perspective of a man called the Marquis of Alverstoke, who comes into Frederica's life because she wants him to bring her and her younger sister into London society because she believes that her sister is so beautiful that she could gain an advantageous marriage, and that's what she wants for her. Frederica is concerned with her family. They are her main priority, and so she doesn't always think about herself. But I think that the thing I love about Georgette Howard's books is that they are very reliable. You know what you're going to get out of them. They basically have the same format and similar characters and a similar feel, but that's why they're so good, because you can predict what's going to happen. And I think that when you're looking for a comfort read, for me the thing I look for is something where I can just fall into it and don't have to overly think about it. I know what I'm going to get. I'm not going to get any surprises thrown in there, and it is that familiarity that feels comforting. So I loved Frederica, but my actual favourite Georgette Howard book so far has been Venetia. I think my favourite ones are her, not series, but her books that are named after the heroine. So I've also read Arabella, and I've read The Convenient Marriage, which is probably my least favourite so far. But Venetia is my favourite. I thought it was quite similar to Frederica, and I read this before Christmas, and this is about Venetia, who has hardly been away from her home, and she gets to know the local landowner who has a very bad reputation in society circles because he is not the most gentlemanly of folk. But when Venetia gets to know him, she realises that there is a different side to him, and maybe people are misjudging him. And I loved it because it was familiar, because I got to know the characters. All the characters are formed in a similar mould, so I knew what I was going to get out of it, and this was one that I just couldn't put down. I love her books, and if you like Jane Austen, I think you'll really love these. They are really well researched, so you know that she knows her stuff, and you know there's not going to be anything you're like, I don't really think that would have happened. Everything is accurate, and that's another thing that I think really works in its favour. The next comfort read is one I talk about quite a bit. It is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. I think that maybe, because I've already read this, I might watch Anne with an E. Sure, there's lots of you who have watched it and love it, but I'd also like to watch the older series of it too, because I just love this story. A story of an orphan girl, Anne, who finds a life for herself in Green Gables, and you follow her along on her journey of life really. You see her mistakes, you see her getting into trouble, you see the highs and the lows, and I think that Anne is one of the most recognisable literary characters. I love her. My favourite of the books is Anne of the Island, but you can't go wrong with Anne of Green Gables. It's where we first meet Anne, and so I think it holds a certain sense of nostalgia about it. I like when you read a series and then you revisit the first book and you do feel nostalgic on behalf of the characters because you know what's going to happen. You feel like you're looking back on them and you're revisiting them and finding out new things that you might have missed the first time. So I think I might reread this, or I might read the next book that I have in the series, which is Anne of Windy Willows, also called Anne of Windy Poplars. Another thing that brings a lot of comfort at times like this is revisiting childhood favourites, and my childhood favourite book is The Fairy Caravan by Beatrix Potter. I've talked about this quite a few times too, and I'd like to talk about it more because I do think it's a book that is highly underrated. In fact, Beatrix Potter herself really loved writing the stories within The Fairy Caravan. She wrote them later on in her life, and a lot of them are based on fables and old folk stories, and it follows a travelling caravan full of animals, including a guinea pig called Tuppeny whose hair refuses to stop growing, and a dormouse called Zarifa who Beatrix Potter actually had, and it talks about their life as they travel around with their circus, and also talks about these stories. The animals tell each other stories, which I love. So you have a main story and then lots of stories within the stories, and I think that her love of nature and the landscape really shines through in this book. And then the final book is one that I don't necessarily want to recommend the whole book, but I would recommend reading some of the poems in it. So I'd like to talk to you about Emily Bronte's poetry. This is my collection of the complete poems, which is published by Penguin, but you can get lots of other editions too. Even if you don't want to buy the book, you can read lots of her poems online, and I love Emily Bronte's poetry. Her poetry probably for me, I mean, it's different than Wuthering Heights, it's a different form, and so it feels like a completely different thing, but her poetry is my favourite. I love her poetry more than any other poem any other poet. She is my favourite, my number one, and I love her poetry because it's set in a fictional world called Gondor. So as you're reading it, you fall into this world, you see everything that's going on in snippets and fragments because it's not a complete story. Even though people have made attempts at piecing the story together, that's only an interpretation and we'll never really know what Emily had in her head, the stories that were playing out. So as you read the poetry, you can almost form that story for yourself. And it's incredibly atmospheric. I think there's a poem for every season. Poems set in the snow, poems out on the moor in the height of summer, poems for the spring, poems when the bluebells are coming out. She taps into nature and uses it as a device in her poetry and also as a secondary character, which is particularly interesting to read. I love Emily, and in times of need I always reach for my copy of her poetry. I find that there's a poem that can make me feel better even if the themes are slightly darker than you would expect. She was a genius and her poetry is really when that genius comes out. So those are some of the books that I am reaching for at the moment. I really hope you enjoyed this video and found lots of recommendations, and I'd love to know your comfort reads in the comments, what you are reading at the moment to make yourself feel better. Like I said at the start, I'm sending all of my love to all of you and hope that you remain well. I'm sending my absolute best wishes. I'll be back soon with another video and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!